Rush hour trains howled through tunnels. Doors yawned open, and a tide of strangers poured out like the city exhaled them. Neon bled into puddles. Horns stitched the air. And somewhere beneath it all, a softer rhythm waited. Steady, insistent, impossible to ignore. Eyes met across the crowd, held for a heartbeat too long, and the noise receded the way an old tide pulls back from the shore. Not a word, not yet. Only the gravity of recognition, heavy as summer heat. Footsteps fell into an accidental duet along the sidewalk. Shop windows threw shards of light across passing faces. That voice, low, careful, lined with a gentleness that felt like a hand at the small of the back, asked for directions that didn't matter. The question trembled between distance and desire, as if careful not to startle something delicate and sleeping. The answer came with a smile, soft as dusk. Names were exchanged as if they might break in the holding. Then, silence again, comfortable in the space where words would have been, a quiet pact already forming. The city, insatiable and sleepless, tried to intervene. It tossed sirens like stones into the calm, shoved bodies between two people who had just discovered the exact temperature of each other's nearness. Crowds swelled, conversations flared. A street performer hammered rhythm from a dented drum. Still the current held. A small cafe became an island. The window fogged at the edges. Coffee rose in delicate steam, and hands hovered near the same sugar jar, neither wanting to move away first. Every glance was a confession. Nothing had happened, and everything had. Fingertips traced circles on the paper cup, letting time slow down and flare up in the same breath. Stories were offered in fragments, each detail a lantern lit and set afloat. Childhood storms, favorite songs for rainy mornings, the way the city light stitched constellations along the river. Laughter came that didn't feel like defense, more like the simple miracle of being seen. Somewhere a bus brake squealed. Somewhere a couple argued about groceries. Everywhere, life continued with its beautiful indifference, and in that indifference grew a private cosmos. Evening slipped into the bones of the city, turning glass offices into honeycombs of gold. A walk began without deciding to walk. Shoulders touched by accident, and then not by accident. The first brush of a sleeve held, the way a note holds after the piano key is lifted, vibrating in the air longer than expected. That one touch spoke the unnamed truth. Something had already crossed the threshold. No announcement, just arrival. He spoke in that careful voice again, as though decoding a spell, and the sound of it poured calm through the chaos. Questions, simple ones, but asked with a reverence that made answers feel like gifts. What brought this life here? What part of the city feels like home? Which song hurts in a good way? Each response encouraged another and then another. Words unfolded like evening primrose, one petal at a time. Between those petals, silence bloomed. And in that silence hid bodies leaning closer, breath finding its own choreography, heartbeats moving from scattered to synchronized. A crosswalk sign flashed red. Neither moved. The city's impatience dropped into a hush. Somewhere deep, courage stirred. Small, bright, necessary. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It had been decided the moment eyes met across the concourse. Still, there's always a threshold. The last step taken with the old life at the heels. The new one opening like a door in the dark. The step happened. The first kiss didn't belong to the lips so much as to the quiet right before them. That moment, hovering, warm, inevitable, held an entire conversation. Can this be real? Is it safe to believe? Please let it be true. When mouths finally found each other, streetlight draped them in a soft gold that forgave everything. The city, nosy as ever, leaned in, then decided to look away. The kiss tasted like relief and a little like terror, because the deepest wants always carry a shadow. Hands found the architecture of another's shoulders, wrists, jawline, the sacred geography that can't be studied, only learned by touch. Breath tangled. Time did that thing time rarely does. It obeyed. Nights began to gather themselves around this pull. A pattern emerged. Meet where the river bends under the museum bridge, where the railings hum with late trains and the water holds the city upside down. Walk past windows full of paintings and dresses and sleeping dogs, invent stories about strangers, buy mandarins from the woman who always forgets to give exact change. Then find a quiet corridor between buildings where the air holds the cool of stone and the faint sweetness of laundry venting from above. Lean there and speak softly. Let fingertips do what language cannot. The closeness evolved with a patient boldness, not a conquer, but a surrender. Lips learned the path from shoulder to throat. Breath learned how to slow a trembling body. Clothes were not battlegrounds. They were just whether the night eventually asked to shed. Nothing hurried. Nothing forced. No scene to shock. No spectacle to stage. Only the warm, steady fact of two lives meeting where both felt most human. In the half-light, vulnerability became a cathedral, and desire a prayer made of touch. Every sigh told a story older than fear. Skin remembered how to trust. Days, on the other hand, required disguises. Secrets don't thrive in daylight. They endure it with resourcefulness. Messages hid in songs swapped back and forth, in red scarves worn on Tuesdays, in coffee cups marked with initials only two people understood. Chance meetings timed to look like accidents. A brush of a hand on a crowded stair. The elegant choreography of pretending. Each deceit left a pinprick of ache, but the nights promised a balm. Laughter that spilled uncontrollably in tiny kitchens. The ritual of late dinners eaten cross-legged on the floor. The gentle solemnity of bandaging a paper cut on a thumb because care is never about size. There were moments of fear that brought the truth into sharp focus. A friend almost turned the corner too soon. A phone rang at a terrible time, and the sound sliced the room. The heart is a wild, stubborn thing. It gallops when cornered, but it also breaks hard when love steps in front of it and says, "Easy." Every risk reminded these two what was at stake. Not just a thrill, not a rebellion for its own sake. A home being built brick by tender brick, in a neighborhood the map didn't include. In quieter hours, the city's hum sank to a low purr, and the body learned the language of another's sleeping. The small twitch when a dream arrives. The exhale that lengthens when a hand is placed over a heartbeat. Morning crept up with pale light and responsible thoughts, and the new day always asked the same question without words. Will this be carried safely through the hours ahead? The answer remained faithful, through eyelash flutters, through the slow, gorgeous stretch of waking, through the persistence of the pull that didn't weaken with habit, but strengthened with knowing. Not every night burned with the blaze of first discovery. Some nights were ordinary, and ordinary can be the holiest kind of intimacy. Dishwater warm and cloudy while talking about nothing. A shared podcast that becomes an inside joke. Socks found at the bottom of the bed and thrown, laughing across the room. The city loves spectacle, but love often prefers the soft-spoken. The unspoken promise didn't need to be shouted. It needed to be kept. Of course, no secret remains weightless forever. The pact with silence becomes heavier, the longer it's carried. The body knows. It tightens when footsteps echo outside the door. It softens when a key slides into the lock and the right face appears. A beautiful life asks for space, air, sunlight. That truth didn't arrive as an accusation, more a tender knocking, gentle, persistent, impossible to ignore. Not now, said the heart. Soon, murmured the soul. Later, whispered the city. But the pull kept tugging toward something larger than fear. The night it rained hard enough to write silver on the pavement, everything felt inevitable. Clothes clung, hair curled, laughter spilled from a mouth tasting like rain. The story of the first meeting was told again, not to remember, but to deepen what remembering had become. Fingers laced, foreheads rested together. The city was 1,000 beating drums, and inside that storm formed a chapel of quiet. The truth stood between two bodies like a third presence, neither threat nor judge, only invitation. The magnetic pull of the unspoken had never really been unspoken at all. It had been speaking from the first glance on that crowded platform, from the first question asked with that careful voice. Every silence had been a kind of vow, every touch a sentence in a language learned by instinct. And now, Under rain that stitched the sky to the earth, the pull resolved into a single steady courage, still tender, still fierce, still saying the same simple thing. Come closer. Come closer. Night pressed its cool palm against the windows until the glass fogged and the street turned to watercolor. Smears of pink neon, the blue pulse of a distant sign, headlights sliding like comets down wet asphalt. Inside, shadows pooled in the corners, warm as held breath. The city quieted to a hush that wasn't silence at all, more a velvet curtain drawn between the world and the small, glowing secret held here. The lock clicked, the soft music of keys placed in a bowl, shoes set side by side like a promise. A jacket slid from shoulders. Fabric sighed across fabric. The room learned the new shape of the night. The walls knew the rhythm before any word did. They'd learned the small thunder of a heartbeat that sped up at the sound of a familiar step on the stairs. The tremor of anticipation that passed through a body the way wind passes through grass, visible only by what it moves. A lamp switched on, then dimmed to its gentlest setting, gold ambering the air. In that light, faces softened, edges blurred. Even the framed photographs on the shelf looked away, as if to offer privacy. Nothing needed to be performed. The night asked only for truth. Hands found their language first. A thumb traced the soft valley where a wrist meets the palm. Fingers mapped shoulders with the care of a cartographer who knows every line matters. The skin between collar and jaw grew warm under the slow attention of touch that didn't rush, didn't demand, simply learned. The first kiss belonged to patience. Lips hovered, warmed, waited for the breath that said yes without saying it, for the stillness that consent makes. A stillness that isn't absence, but presence at its most alert. When mouths met, the exhale tasted like homecoming after a too long road. Outside, a siren wailed and then let itself be forgiven by distance. The city could have burned down to its bedrock, and the room would still have kept this small, unwavering fire. It began with a sigh, the kind that loosens the locked rooms of the chest, and moved into a duet of quiet sounds the night has always known. Backs learned the texture of the wall's paint. Hands learned the slope of a spine. Breath found the rhythm of breath. Every touch wrote an unspoken vow. Here is care, here is tenderness, here is a wanting that protects what it wants. Clothes yielded not to urgency, but to the gravity of closeness. Buttons gave way like stars appearing, slow and inevitable. A sweater lifted over a head felt less like removal and more like revelation, the way a landscape appears when fog lifts. There was nothing to conquer, nothing to take, only something to meet. Warmth gathered where the bodies met. The air took on that faint, unmistakable scent of skin warmed by trust. A laugh surfaced, small, surprised, delighted, and it loosened the room further, as if laughter opened windows no one had noticed. The couch became a shoreline, the rug a field at midnight. With the lights low, the room offered its own constellations. The shine on cheekbones, the curve of a shoulder catching gold, the slow rise and fall that speaks the holy language of being alive. Lips learned paths as old as devotion, temple, cheek, corner of mouth, hollow at the base of the throat. Each place met with a pause that asked, then waited, then continued. A hand at the back of the neck steadied more than the body. It steadied the soul. Words arrived occasionally, but mostly as embers, names spoken like prayers, soft not to startle the wonder. The night didn't need explanation. It needed presence. A candle flickered on the dresser, flame bowing then standing as if keeping time. Outside, rain began in the gentlest dots, a drummer testing the snare before the song. The sound threaded through everything, silver stitching on a dark cloth. Rooms hold memory in the way they hold dust, in the way corners hold a little extra night. The walls here remembered the first time nerves outnumbered breaths, remembered the near-comical difficulty of a zipper because hands shook with too much wanting. They remembered the quiet after, when foreheads rested together and everything in the body seemed to say thank you. They remembered the care taken with each other's softness, a kind of reverence that turned the ordinary sacred. Tonight, all those echoes rose again, not as ghosts, but as blessings, layering the present with affection worn smooth by practice. The tenderness that followed heat felt like tide after storm, no less powerful, only different in force. A blanket drawn up, fingers weaving through hair in slow strokes that asked for nothing beyond the permission to soothe. Water passed from hand to hand, cool glass against a mouth gone warm. The small logistics of love. Where is the phone? Set an alarm. Did the door lock actually catch? Became part of the same ceremony. Proof that passion doesn't live separate from living but woven right through it. Daylight, always the honest friend, would come eventually with its ledger and its questions. But night held a different wisdom, not denial, but refuge. It allowed the heart to take its full size, unpunished. It gave the body room to speak its fierce tenderness, its animal devotion, its hunger braided with care. The darkness didn't hide. It revealed the true contour of feeling without the angles cast by judgment. Under it, vulnerability stepped forward and was kissed on the mouth. Between long silences, stories appeared. Not the rehearsed kind offered at dinners, but the secret branch-like kind that grows in two directions at once, out toward another and back toward the roots. Mistakes confessed without spectacle. Dreams offered without apology. The way grief still lived in a pocket of the chest, heavier on certain dates. The way hope persisted anyway, stubborn as wildflowers in a sidewalk crack. When those confessions were met not with correction but with holding, something old shed its armor and left it on the floor like a coat no longer needed. Every sigh told the truth more honestly than any sentence could. The body doesn't know how to lie when it's safe. A shiver at the graze of a fingertip. A sudden stillness when a palm came to rest over the sternum, as if listening to what beats there. The small intake of breath when kisses found the places that make time stop. All of it was a confession, need, gratitude, wonder. And in answering, touch made its own confession, wanting not only to be satisfied, but to bless. At some point the rain grew steadier, a thrumming on the roof that sounded like a promise kept. The window fogged again, smearing the city into something softer, kinder. In that softened world, the room held a rare balance, fierceness and gentleness, fire and shelter, desire and devotion neither diluting the other. It felt as if the night had drawn a circle with chalk and said, "Here is a safe place." Within that circle there was room for laughter and for quiet, for the bright flare of want and for the long glow of love's afterlight. The secret carried its own weight, yes. Morning would ask for carefulness, messages sent when no one was watching, glances made to look like nothing at all. But the cost was counted against the currency of these hours, and the arithmetic kept coming out the same. The soul doesn't misread its own hunger. When a touch makes the dark feel honest and the self feel whole, the sum resolves. The heart, that stubborn mathematician, lays down the chalk and rests. Later, bodies settled into the soft geometry of sleep. Knees fit behind knees, an arm tucked beneath a waist, breath synchronizing by instinct. The candle dwindled and then went out, leaving only the shape of warmth to light the room. Even asleep, the promise held. Even in dreams, the city went on without them, and still something here remained unshakable. Morning would arrive and reorder things as morning does. But night had already written its truth on skin and breath and the marrow of bone. When the first dull rim of daylight edged the curtains, the world returned in outlines. Coffee would come. The day would put on its shoes. Yet for one last minute the darkness lingered, benevolent, asking one last question without words. Was the secret worth keeping for this? This tenderness that asks for nothing it will not also give? This passion that protects as fiercely as it burns? The answer lived on the tongue, in the chest, in the loosening of shoulders, in the quiet smile that doesn't need a mirror to be known. Let the darkness reveal what love already knows. The first rule of a love that cannot be named is simple. Learn to breathe softly. Air moves differently when a heart is smuggled under a coat. When the street ahead looks ordinary, and the world inside the chest is a contraband city. Footsteps memorize back routes and side doors, the safer stairwell, the cafe where the barista never asks questions. Lips learn to hold a smile that means nothing to anyone else. 1,000 tiny rehearsals for the same performance. Everything is fine. It never was. It was better, and it was worse. There were days laughter came too easily, bubbling up in hallways where it had no business living. A joke whispered into the curve of a neck, a grin caught in a window's reflection, blessings like coins hidden in couch cushions. But laughter was dangerous currency. Spend too much at once and suspicion woke up. So the brightness was hoarded, portioned out with care. A handful of golden seconds to survive the gray. Every meeting carried risk the way fabric carries scent. It followed everywhere, on buses and elevators, beneath polite conversations with people who meant well, and would ruin everything with a single kind inquiry. The body became a courier for mixed messages, shoulders squared to look calm, hands trembling in a pocket where no one could see. Keys were passed without touching, meaning delivered in the arch of an eyebrow. The city learned nothing. It was too busy. Thank God for that. Truth had to be dismantled into manageable pieces. Not lies so much as scaffolding, little supports to hold up the tender thing until it could stand. Working late really meant the small paradise of a borrowed hour. Staying in meant a night where the world narrowed to a pair of hands and the hush between heartbeats. Promises were folded into the blue light of phones, a song link that said what couldn't be said aloud, a photo of afternoon sky that meant I'm here, I'm trying, keep breathing. Goodbyes hurt in a way the body doesn't forget. A door closed with care, shoulders hardened for the walk back into the sanctioned life, and something inside howled softly, refusing to be consoled by the calculus of necessity. The ache made practical sense. Hearts despise practical sense. The ache insisted on itself, vivid and unreasonable, a child crying in a church. After those goodbyes, the world looked slightly unstitched, as if the seams of the day had frayed and light leaked through. Work got done, faces were made, responsibilities kept. And yet the pulse at the wrist told the real news. Still here, still wanting, still choosing. Between laughter and lies, a fragile country emerged. It had no flag, no anthem, only a language no one else could speak. Its laws were clear, tenderness or nothing, honesty inside these walls, even if honesty couldn't travel past them, care that did not turn into possession, patience with the parts that were terrified. In that country, names mattered less than presence. Paperwork couldn't find it. Maps shrugged their shoulders. But doors opened of their own accord, and lights softened when that country was entered. A whole geography built from breaths and glances. Night was kinder than day. Night made room. In it, hands could tell the truth without permission from the mouth. The smallest domestic rituals felt like a defiance of gravity, rinsing 2 cups in a sink. Aligning toothbrushes like parallel lines promised never to meet and somehow meeting anyway. Folding a sweater and setting it on the chair that always waited by the window. These modest gestures became shelter. Survival often looks like gentleness. Soup warmed at midnight. A forehead kissed after a bad dream. The steady hum of a washing machine reminding the nervous system that the ordinary was still possible. Daylight required armor. Polite laughter. Deliberate distance. A careful choreography that lived somewhere between self-preservation and betrayal. Moments collided at the worst times. A scent in the elevator that brought entire nights rushing back. A ringtone that almost sang the wrong name into the wrong room. A sudden catastrophic wave of wanting while discussing budgets or traffic or weather. Tears had to become specialists at holding their breath. Joy learned to pass as composure. Fear tried often to take the steering wheel. What if someone saw? What if a message landed in the wrong hands? What if the edges frayed beyond repair? But fear, for all its discipline, could not compete with the education of a held gaze. That gaze said, the soul did not imagine this. The soul is not wrong about what heals. Fear had statistics. The gaze had truth. Truth in this case wasn't the kind that could be sworn in court. It was quieter, older, the kind that hums in bone. That truth said, love is not a crime, but sometimes cruelty is very organized. The body adapted. It learned to carry joy in stealth mode, to tuck it into the curve under a rib as one might hide a letter or a photograph. A hand could carry an entire day's worth of comfort in a single fleeting press against a forearm. A breath passed across a cheek could erase 6 hours of tension. There were times when words would have betrayed the whole enterprise with their clumsy noise. In those hours, silence was fluent and merciful. Two heads leaned together and let understanding pour through a seam no one else could see. A fragile world also cracks. Nothing breaks as cleanly as hope. It splinters. It leaves hazardous little pieces that glint even in the dark. Sharpness arrived as a rumor spoken by a friend who cared too much, or a meeting scheduled where it never should have been, or a glance that lasted 1 second longer than safety allowed. The country of us trembled. The law of tenderness faced a referendum called fear. Borders tightened. Checkpoints appeared at former open fields. Words became fewer, not because there was less to say, but because everything said could be used as evidence. And yet, amid the tightening, love refused to starve. A paper crane made from a receipt and tucked into a pocket. A book whose margin notes formed a second hidden story. A playlist that rose and fell in a pattern that mapped a body's favorite places to rest. A single peach bought at a market and left on the counter with a note. Sweetness survives. One evening, the thunder came fast and rolling, a sky bruise over the city. Rain patched the streets with silver and erased footprints before they cooled. The room took the storm into its lungs and exhaled something like courage. Two faces found each other with the relief born of too much pretending. The kiss held and held until names fell away and the softer, true names took their place, the ones spoken only by touch. A vow was made there, not the kind with witnesses and toast, but the kind that knows vows are not protected by ceremony. The vow said, "Whatever the world insists on calling this, inside this circle it will be called love, and it will be cared for like something living. After storm, a quiet. The kind of quiet that makes clocks sound arrogant." In that quiet, the future stood at the foot of the bed like a stranger with good intentions and terrible timing. Choices laid themselves out like clothing on a chair. This one soft but thin, this one strong but abrasive, this one warm and heavy and expensive. No perfect fit. No risk-free option. The heart, consulted as an expert witness, raised one eyebrow in a way that said, "The question is not how to avoid pain, but which pain the soul can live with and still sing." Life, stubborn in its insistence, demanded arrangement, not surrender. Arrangement. A plan was drawn that looked at first glance like compromise, and on closer inspection like fidelity to sanity. Routes were changed. Hours adjusted. When to speak, and when to hold the speaking in two hands until the right moment arrived. Care arrived in unusual packaging. Legal advice, a new door lock, a neighbor bribed with sourdough bread for the occasional hall lookout. Love learned new tricks because staying alive required them. There were costs. There always are. Faces turned away that once turned toward. Rooms that felt smaller than they should. A loneliness that visited even in the most companioned hour. The loneliness of not being able to share the best thing except in the one place it was born to live. Tears, too, because the body understands math. What is carried must also be put down sometimes. The tears came, and a hand was there, and the hand did not rush the stopping. It's astonishing how much safety the steady act of being witnessed can create. And then there were the uncountable, unphotographable moments that refilled the soul's lungs. The first peach bite shared on a balcony. The way early sunlight paints shoulders in a gold that forgives everything. The sudden and inexplicable peace that settles over a room when laughter stops at the same second for two people. These were the reasons. Not grand, not loud. Reasons that looked like survival because they were. When a love cannot be named, it grows its own roots in secret soil. It learns to bend without breaking, to bloom under streetlights, to listen for the whistle only two hearts can hear. It does not ask for permission. It asks for courage. And every time courage answers, even with a whisper, something new is born out of the old fear, a life that doesn't apologize for wanting to be alive. Choose the love that lets the soul breathe. ChatGPT said, secrets burn hottest at the edges. That's where the light flares, where the vow is brightest just before it thins, where a kiss tries to outrun the clock and learns the clock always wins. The city knew. Windows blinked their patient warnings each night, and street lamps stood like quiet witnesses. Even the elevator understood, pulling its cables with a sympathetic shiver as if to say, "Careful with that heart you're carrying. It's full of matches." At first the heat felt harmless. Festival heat, midsummer heat, the kind that makes laughter spill easier and makes a body generous with yes. Door locks clicked like flint, lights dimmed until gold turned to amber, and the room forgave everything. Breath wrote little promises on skin that evaporated and somehow stayed. The soul believed what souls always believe when tenderness is painstaking and desire is gentle, that what holds so carefully cannot possibly slip. But fire asks for oxygen and secrets are airtight. That's how the ache began, soft and early, the way smoke arrives before the flames are seen. A tightness in the throat when morning crept in under the curtains. A pause too long before answering a polite question at work. A gaze that had to be redirected because truth was sitting right there in the pupils, not dangerous yet, only bright enough to make the world squint. The first sign was small. A favorite cafe closed its back room for renovations, the one with the corner table that made strangers disappear. Meetings shifted to walkways and parks, to benches that pretended to be private while the city sauntered past, pretending not to look. Fingers learned restraint again, the choreography of proximity without touch. That restraint made each glance heavier, each laugh deeper, each goodbye sharper. The heart, ever literal, didn't understand. It knocked against the ribs like someone trapped in a house that still looked fine from the street. Then came the second sign, not small at all. A message reaching the wrong eyes would have looked innocent to anyone else, but not to those eyes. The room chilled without dropping a degree. Fear rushed in like wind through a door that had been leaning on nothing but hope. Necessary words were said in careful voices. Pages were torn from the calendar and taped up again in different configurations. Safety first. Safety always. Safety, which love accepts because love wants a future even more than it wants flame. Nights didn't stop. They just changed color. The amber went ash blue. Touch collected itself, quieter, concentrated. This gentling wasn't distance. It was reverence in a storm. Hands slowed down as if memorizing a book before it was taken from the shelf. Mouths spoke fewer syllables and meant them more. Time, stubborn, smug, kept peeling off minutes and tossing them behind its shoulder. So the soul learned to widen each one from the inside, like a lyric stretch to hold more breath. Fire adapts, but it will not be tricked. The heat that once felt like a rival began to flicker with the restlessness of something that knows its container is wrong. The body felt it first, shoulders carrying tension like heavy fabric, sleep that pretended to be sleep, the startle at footsteps in the hall. The mind tried to be reasonable, rehearsing the math of consequences, the geometry of secrecy. Reason is valiant and not nearly strong enough to argue with a pulse. The pulse drummed its answer. Love is here. Love is real. Love cannot breathe through a closed door forever. What broke wasn't a moment. Breaks rarely are. They accumulate like hairline fractures in porcelain, invisible to anyone who isn't holding the thing every day. A missed train that used to mean more talking now meant less time. A sudden obligation ripped a hole in an evening that had been promised to softness. The world didn't do this on purpose. It simply did what the world does, applied pressure carelessly like weather. And a secret, no matter how sacred, is still made of human hours and human hands. Those wear down. The night the flame admitted its exhaustion, rain ran off the roof in ropes. The city sounded like it was washing something it couldn't name. The room was tidy, ridiculously so, as if order could bargain with fate. Washed cups, folded blanket, the candle trimmed to a clean wick. Bodies came together the way the sea meets shore after a storm, not triumphant, only undeniable. There wasn't a fight. There was carefulness and the kind of quiet that makes every breath sacred. The kiss didn't say forever. It said thank you, and it said stay, and it said how, and none of those words contradicted the others until they did. Somewhere in the middle of that long blue hour, the future took a seat on the chair by the window. Not the fantasy future, the practical one, with rent, with families, with faces that would be hurt by truths they can't metabolize. Fire looked over, weary and proud. Love looked too, fierce and tender. unwilling to let fear write the ending, unwilling to let recklessness write it either. The choice wasn't between love and responsibility. The choice was between one kind of ache and another. Hands clasped in the dark. The kind of clasp that isn't romantic at all. The kind used by climbers at a ledge or by mothers in a crowd. Don't let go. And yet the wisdom sitting there, the unglamorous, faithful wisdom, kept returning to the same instruction. Let go, not of love's truth, but of the shape that truth has worn until now. The shape is failing. The truth deserves better than suffocation. Morning came early, as morning does when it's been appointed to do something unkind. Coffee steamed in a kitchen that had learned so many versions of breath. There was no drama, only the slow choreography of practicalities wrapped around tenderness, the sorting of books, the untangling of a playlist, the return of a sweater that had absorbed a year of laughing and sleeping and rain. The mirror didn't betray anyone. It reflected two faces that had loved each other fiercely, and were, in this moment, committed to not destroying what that love had returned to life. Goodbye isn't a single door. It's a corridor lined with doors that keep appearing. The text not sent, the photograph archived, the street avoided for a while, the scent that turns an aisle in the market into a chapel. Each door opened and closed with that same quiet latch. The city went on, traffic, errands, headlines. Inside the ribcage, something luminous went quiet but did not die. Quiet and dead are not the same. Days acquired a new habit. Sudden heat behind the eyes at the oddest times. A song in a taxi. A wristwatch still set 5 minutes fast because that used to match someone else's. A patch of sun on a wall at 4 p.m. that looked exactly like the room left behind. Grief, when it's honest, is clean. It doesn't ask for pity. It demands water and rest and a reasonable amount of silence. The heart provided those as best it could, and the heart was patient with itself on the days it couldn't. Healing arrived disguised as small competence. Remembering to eat. Realizing the body no longer braced at every footstep in the hall. Waking to light and discovering it didn't hurt. The scar tissue formed where love had burned brightest. Not numb, not hard, just new. Touch there and warmth answers back. Proof of life inside the mark. There is pride in that. Not the pride of having won, because nothing was won or lost, only lived. The pride of having carried a flame in a paper lantern through a windy city, and not once letting it go out until the lantern itself wore through. Memory stayed. It refused exile and didn't deserve one. It sat at the table like a beloved elder with stories to tell, and when it spoke, it blessed instead of scolding. Remember the museum bridge, the way trains wrote light on the river. Remember the rain that learned both faces by heart. Remember the nights that turned rooms into countries with their own merciful laws. Remember all of it, not as an argument for returning, but as a testimony. Love like that existed. It changed the weather inside the bones. It made a self both softer and stronger. It sent that self back into the world more careful with other people's hidden fires. Sometimes late, the city glows in that exact shade that preceded the first kiss. The body recognizes it and smiles without moving the mouth. Peace is not forgetfulness. It's the end of wrestling with a truth that has found its place. The scar warms. The mark says what words cannot. This burned once, and the burning mattered, and the skin learned a new way to hold light. Not a home now, no, but a compass. A small, reliable heat near the center, pointing toward tenderness whenever the road grows cold. Some flames are meant to leave marks, not homes. If this story touched a corner of your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Hit like, share it with someone who believes in impossible love, and subscribe for more tales where desire meets destiny. Because here, every ending still burns with the memory of true, deep love.